And welcome back, everyone. As you can already see from the title, today I will not analyze any openings, at least not specifically, but I just wanted to briefly talk about the Dutch Championship, which has already concluded a couple of days ago. So I'm a bit late on it, but I still thought it would be interesting to report on it. One reason for that is because two players of the same family have won the Dutch Championship, both in the open group and in the female group, respectively. So I thought that was pretty amusing and pretty cool at the same time, and already gave me one reason to make a video about it. The second reason was that I thought that some of the games were interesting, and I wanted to show you guys both one game of Jorden van Foreest, who won the open event, and of Machteld van Foreest, who won the female event. So I wanted to start out with this game. So Jorden won the final against Luke van Wely. Luke, of course, a player who has been part of the highest level for many years, and it's still very impressive to me to see how strong he's still able to play at his age. I mean, I think if I'm informed correctly, he's probably approaching 50, or he's somewhere around that age. He looks pretty young, that's for sure. But it's still quite impressive that he keeps playing on this quite high level, and that he was able to reach the finals in the very strong Dutch Championship. And the game I'm about to show you was in the game number 2 of the final. So Jorden had the white pieces against Luke van Wely. And I thought it was also interesting to show that van Wely, after all those years, still sticks to his Sicilian and always loved to go for this Scheveningen system with e6. So I saw many games of Luke van Wely playing this type of structure, and I was always very much inspired by his play here, just because he also has so much experience. As far as I know, he's been going through different move orders, plays all sorts of Sicilians, but this is kind of the structure he really likes to play. And the structure itself is not really being played as much anymore, because people nowadays tend to just play with e5 in the Najdorf, and therefore e6 is not seen so often anymore. But still, it's actually quite a nice line for black, and it was also one system which I recommended in one of my own courses about the Najdorf, which was released in 2021 on Chessamy. Where in that course I always tried to go for those e6 setups, because I was always kind of a fan myself of playing this classical Scheveningen way. Also Kasparov played it many times in the 90s and so on. So Jorden played f4. Obviously he was prepared, because Luke had already had so many games here. Luke played bishop e7, and now bishop e3 was Jorden's choice. Van Wely also had a game. He didn't have a game. I had a game here with the black pieces after g4, what I wanted to say. That g4 right away is a little bit early, because now after d5, e5, knight d7, I get quite a good version, because I haven't castled yet, and I can immediately play, for example, bishop h4, g5, as happened in my game. This is how one of my games went, where I had black, and g5 was a nice move, and after that I already was taking over the initiative. So Jorden went bishop e3, which is, I think, a bit better. Now Luke played short castle. Queen c7 is another choice, but play is probably gonna go like that as well. And white looks like he's having a slightly better version of some of the French Steinitz variations overall, because he already has so much space on the king side. But Jorden played g4, so Van Wely started with short castle, g4, d5, e5, and now knight e4. Again, knight d7 would lead to something similar, even arguably a worse version for black, because he has already castled. So Van Wely played knight e4, which he already has played a couple of months, or not months, but I think it was last year, 2024. Van Wely played like this in a French team championship. And his opponent there took on e4 and then went g5. And after a couple of moves also had some advantage. This was Van Wely's position here as black. But Jorden even came up with an improvement, this nice move short castle, which I thought was very interesting also from a strategical standpoint, because white is inviting black to take on c3, which would ruin the pawn structure. But it's quite interesting to see this after bc, that the position is very much in the favor of white when it comes to attacking the king on the king side, the black king, because black doesn't really have any concrete counterplay, and of course the pawn on c3 is a long-term target. It's very hard for black to generate any type of play now on the queen side. There was one correspondence game that went knight d7, now queen e1, knight c5, g5. This was how the game went, which also looked incredibly dangerous for for black, because there's always rook h3 and queen h4, similar to what happened in the game. I think an improvement here after knight d7 would be rook f3, and this was the line I checked, not to bother. Like in the correspondence game, he made some bishop d3 moves and so on. But still looks quite dangerous for black, but maybe would have been a better choice than queen c7, which is going after the pawn on c3, but as we will now see, it was not the best decision. Jorden played bishop d3. I'm curious if he was still in preparation around here. Would definitely be interesting to know. Otherwise, I mean, bishop d3 is also a little bit logical, I would say, but you are giving up the pawn on c3, so it is quite a committal decision as well. And Luke also takes it. It's already quite difficult for him here, because after something like knight c6, then white could go queen e1, and then rook f3, rook h3 at some moment, and the point of queen e1 was that after f6, which would otherwise be a good idea for black, then white could go queen h4. But Luke took on c3, and now Jorden played king h1, which is a novelty and also the best move. So therefore my theory that he might have been prepared even up until here. And Luke played knight c6, and now after rook b1, he was already close to lost, because now rook b3 often is coming. Even the queen on c3 sometimes can be trapped. For example, there was this nice line after bishop d7, knight d2, queen a3, rook b3, and at the end of the line, the queen is getting trapped on a5. Black also cannot take on d4, because if he takes twice, then bishop h7 comes, and otherwise if the queen goes back, then just f5, and white is completely crushing through. So Luke tried knight a5, but now rook f3, and white is just going at it with attack. Knight c4, bishop f2, queen a5, and now bishop takes h7. This was the final sacrifice, and after a couple of moves later, king g8, g5, now queen h5 is a huge threat, so g6, and now just the very calm but nice move queen g4, and now queen h4 is basically unstoppable. It was funny how the game concluded, because Luke tried to give up the queen for the rook on h3, but now c3. Jorden is not even going for that, queen takes a2, and now just queen h4, giving up the rook on b1. King g2, queen e4 check, and knight f3, and here black resigned. So I thought that was a very nice finish of the game as well, where white has given up the whole entire queen side, but is just left here with the two attackers, but they're doing the job, the queen on h4 and the rook on h3. So that was quite beautiful, and it all went wrong for Luke already, I think, around this moment with queen c7. And how Jorden played it, I think it makes this line for black very, very difficult to face. I think this will be quite a big problem when it comes to the theory standpoint of that line. So black players definitely have to come up with something if they want to continue playing this line with e6. So that was the first game I wanted to check out with you. And the second one was from Machteld van Foreest in the semifinals, I believe it was, against Kazarian Anna Meyer. Machteld won the finals then against Robin Duson, but I decided to take a game from the semifinals against Anna Meyer Kazarian, because I thought it was quite beautiful. So Machteld had the white pieces, and it started off as a knight off, and here she went for the very aggressive move f4, e5, and knight f3. This is quite an old line, but also a new line at the same time, because white players often came up with some new and interesting ideas, as Machteld also did in this game. Now, Kazarian went for knight bd7, which I believe to be the main move. There is also queen c7, but then after bishop d3, bishop e7, castle, castle. Yeah, the queen is often nice on c7. It hinders white from going bishop c4, but on the other hand, it's not always necessary for black to put it there. It still is a very good system. Firouzja was one of the players who went for it in the past. My suggestion here, if you're interested in playing this line, would be to go king h1, and after knight d7, now also g4, as we will see later in the game, which was Machteld's idea. I think this line can be very interesting, especially as a surprise weapon. There was one game between Sitchev and Abdisalimov. If you want to check that line, definitely check it out. It goes on a little bit further. At the end, it's quite unclear, but black has to find a couple of only moves here to even survive. So that would be quite a nice and almost new idea here, if you're trying to have a look at it. Also, note that the logical move b5 is not really good because of this sequence, and at the end, white also gets quite a powerful attack on the king side, and also the pawn on b4 sometimes can be weak. Typically, one idea would be to go a5 at some moment to undermine the pawn on b4. But in the game, knight bd7 was played, now a4, and now queen c7, the point being that if black would go bishop e7 first, then bishop c4 can be quite dangerous. So queen c7, and now Machteld went for the move g4, which is a very new and interesting way of playing. And it has been tried a couple of times by strong grandmasters in the past, but it's quite a new line. I think the first one to play it was Amin Tabatabai in the London Classic 2023. Against Nikita Vityugov, the game went d5, g5, and now d4, and it went to all sorts of craziness around here. The game went queen b6, bishop a3, and at the end, Tabatabai won a very fascinating game. So the line can tend to be very sharp. Vityugov actually reacted extremely well on the idea. I'm not sure if he was prepared there, but if he wasn't, it was quite an impressive reaction, because already to come up with this move d5 is maybe not entirely obvious, I would say. And then also g5, d4. D takes e4 was another move, but anyway, black has so many different possible options. In the game, Anna-Maja went for knight takes g4, which does allow knight d5 though, and now after queen d8, rook g1, which was also played by Machteld. And all of a sudden, white at least gets a lot of time with pieces to get out, and tends to have quite significant initiative for the sacrifice pawn. And here already Anna-Maja went a little bit wrong with knight df6, which is very logical because it develops the bishop on c8. But the knight on g4 then tends to be hanging a little bit, and you needed to go knight gf6 back, and after bishop c4 now to have knight b6. This is also an important idea, to still have the knight to go to b6. And at the end of the line, black will be fine, but yeah, it's not so obvious to spot that during the game for sure. But black went knight df6, now bishop c4, and here already black is under some pressure, because the knight on g4, even though it is protected 2 times now, sometimes can be hanging, and the knight on d5 is threatening quite a couple of jumps as well. Black should have gone bishop e6 here, which is still sort of playable, but white can also in some moment go h3, and then the knight would have to go to h6 back. Of course, it's very unclear, but white definitely has enough compensation. But black went knight takes d5, and after queen takes d5, now white is really taking over. Queen c7 was played. It's important to note that bishop e6 doesn't work due to queen b7, bishop c4, queen c6 check, and white is picking up the bishop on c4, and the king is also on e7. Queen d7 wasn't possible because of queen 8, of course. So black played queen c7, and now knight g5 was a very nice move by Machteld, just hitting the pawn on f7, and at the same time also avoiding bishop e6 from being played. Knight h6, sort of forced to protect the pawn on f7, f takes e5, d takes e5, and now rook f1. It's also a committal decision to take on e5, because you are freeing black's bishop on f8, but Machteld evaluated it correctly, that it's just impossible for black to hold on to f7. So bishop e7 was played, knight takes f7, and now bishop h3, which was probably the final mistake, but the only defense, bishop h4 check. And bishop g4, also at the end of the line, is quite bad for black. It was a funny line though. King d3, knight f7, rook f7, bishop e7, bishop g5 was what I checked. And after rook d8, now take on e7, everything. And funnily enough, this endgame here, white has quite a nice final move, which is a5. Should be winning for white. Maybe there were other variations as well in between, surely there were, but it was just nice to point out this final move a5, because whenever black now takes on d5 after bishop d5, this pawn on b7 is going to be fixed as a weakness, and black's pawns are not going much further in the near future, and white is just pushing b4, c4, and b5 quite fast as well, and the bishop on g4 can never move because this pawn on g7 will be hanging. Thought this was a nice finish of the line. But black played bishop h3, now rook f2, bishop h4, and now knight d6 was coming, and here black's king is already under a lot of fire. King d8 and rook a3 was a move I very much liked. Already white has quite a couple of winning moves in this position, but it just brings in the last remaining piece from white's camp, so that's why I just quite like this decision to play rook a3. Bishop d7, knight takes b7 check, king e7, bishop g5 was another nice move to unpin the rook from f2, and now to have rook f7 check. Would be a nice checkmate if black would take, then queen f7, because the knight on b7 is covering those two squares. But king e8 was played in the game, knight d6 check, black had to give the queen, and yeah, not so much more interesting things happen after queen f5 now. Black resigned. So a very nice game by Machteld, and yeah, that's it for today. Congratulations to the Van Foreest family. It's nice to see that a family has brought forward so many strong players. Of course, Jorden and Machteld, and also Lucas van Foreest. So yeah, interesting developments in the Netherlands, and was quite nice to follow this event, especially because it's also a knockout event, just like the World Cup. So those events are always nice to follow. So thank you guys for watching. That was it for today. If you enjoyed the video, definitely leave a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also visit my website, felixbroberg.com. Also visit me on Instagram, Twitter, and my website. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.